Before you hear the rest of this, I want you to do something very specific. Think of one moment when your child almost told you something real, then suddenly changed the answer. Maybe they looked away. Maybe they shrugged. Maybe they smiled too fast. Maybe they said, "Fine," in that strange, flat voice that every parent recognizes, but almost nobody knows how to decode. Hold that moment in your mind, because before this video ends, there is a high chance you will realize the problem was never just what your child said. The real problem was what your child expected would happen if they kept talking. And once you understand that, you start hearing your child in a completely different way. Because children rarely stop trusting their parents in one dramatic moment. It almost never happens like that. No giant speech, no cinematic betrayal. No single family disaster that clearly explains everything. In real life, trust erodes quietly. Through tone, through timing, through facial expressions, through the way a normal conversation starts to feel emotionally expensive. That is how distance begins in so many homes. A parent thinks, "I'm helping." A child feels, "I'm being corrected." A parent thinks, "I'm guiding." A child feels, "I'm being managed." A parent thinks, "I'm protecting." A child feels, "I'm being watched." And when that gap repeats often enough, children begin doing something that looks small, but changes the relationship completely. They stop bringing you the unedited version of themselves. Not because they do not love you, not because they are manipulative masterminds running a secret operation from the back seat of the car, but because they have learned that honesty does not always feel safe in your presence. That sentence hurts, but it explains more family tension than almost anything else. Children do not usually ask themselves, what is the most morally perfect answer here? More often, especially in hard moments, they ask, what answer creates the least emotional fallout? That is a very human question. Adults do it too. We just use more sophisticated words for it. And this is why some children become distant while still looking totally normal from the outside. They still answer your questions. They still go to school. They still sit at the table. They still say, yes, no, maybe, I'm tired. Nothing happened. Don't worry about it. But what has changed is that you are no longer hearing from the center of them. You are hearing from the protective layer. And once that happens, the relationship can look fine while becoming emotionally thin. The first habit that quietly breaks trust is reacting faster than you understand. Your child walks in the door and something is off. You feel it instantly. What happened? Why are you upset? What's wrong now? Did something happen at school? Talk to me. It sounds caring. It sounds involved. It sounds like good parenting. But to a child who is already overwhelmed, embarrassed, overstimulated, ashamed, tired, or socially bruised, that kind of immediate pressure can feel like another demand on a nervous system that is already overloaded. Now they do not only have the original problem, now they have your urgency too. And many children would rather deal with one painful feeling privately than deal with the feeling and your emotional acceleration at the same time. That is why they say nothing, or fine, or I forgot, or can we not do this right now? Parents often hear that as resistance, but a lot of the time what they are seeing is protection. Because a child who has not yet processed their own experience does not want to perform clarity for an adult who needs answers immediately. That is a huge distinction. The parent thinks, why are you shutting me out? The child feels, why do I have to explain myself before I even know what I feel? And if this happens enough, children learn that any visible emotional shift in front of you will quickly become a conversation. So they start hiding the shift itself. They flatten, they shorten, they become vague. They stop showing the first sign of discomfort, not because they are doing better, because it feels easier than being emotionally pulled open before they are ready. The second habit that breaks trust is asking questions that feel like hidden accusations. Are you hiding something? Tell me the truth. What really happened? Why are you acting weird? Do I need to worry? Why are you being so quiet? Adults hear concern. Children often hear danger. Because those questions usually do not arrive in a neutral atmosphere. They arrive with a face, a tone, a tension, an expectation. They carry the emotional message that the child is already halfway under suspicion. And once a child feels suspected, honesty gets harder. Not because guilt always exists, because pressure changes the body. Children start scanning. What does my parent already think? What answer will make this worse? How much do I say? What if I say it badly? What if one sentence turns into 20 minutes? And in that moment, the child is no longer choosing between openness and secrecy in some abstract moral way. They are trying to navigate exposure. This is why some kids lie badly. Not because they think the lie is brilliant, because their nervous system is looking for a quick exit. That matters. Because when parents treat every weak lie as proof of character failure, they often miss what the lie is trying to avoid. Sometimes it is consequence. But just as often, it is emotional intensity. The third habit is turning every difficult moment into a lesson. This one is incredibly common because it feels responsible. A child makes a mistake. A parent thinks, this is my chance to teach. So the child gets a speech about trust, about choices, about respect, about consequences, about the future, about character, about life. And maybe every word is technically true. That is not the issue. The issue is timing. Because children are not always in a state where teaching can land. A child who feels ashamed, flooded, embarrassed, scared, or cornered is not in a learning state. They are in a protective state. And in a protective state, even good advice can feel like emotional noise. That is why some kids look blank during lectures, not because they are defiant, because their system has already gone into defense. And once the child is in defense, the lesson you think you are teaching is often not the lesson they receive. You think you are teaching honesty. They learn that mistakes become emotionally overwhelming here. You think you are teaching responsibility. They learn that being honest means getting trapped in a long, uncomfortable experience. You think you are teaching respect. They learn to shut down faster. This is where many parents accidentally train children to delay the truth. Not because the child wants to become deceptive, because the child wants to postpone the emotional experience attached to the truth. The fourth habit is correcting the feeling before understanding it. Your child says, I hate school. You say, you do not hate school, you're just tired. Your teen says, nobody likes me. You say, that's not true. Stop talking like that. Your child says, I'm bad at this. You say, don't say that. Just try harder. Your teen says, I don't care. You say, yes, you do. You're just being dramatic. Parents do this because they want to help, because they want to soften pain, because they want to stop negative thinking, because they want their child to be resilient. But to the child, it often feels like emotional editing. The child brings one raw feeling into the room. The parent immediately rewrites it into something more acceptable, less intense, less inconvenient, less uncomfortable for everyone involved. And when that happens enough times, children stop trusting their own internal world around you. They start thinking, maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I should say it differently. Maybe I should not say it at all. This is one reason some children look calm while becoming emotionally distant. They are learning that only certain versions of their inner reality are welcome. But real connection does not begin when the child says it perfectly. It begins when the parent can stay with the imperfect feeling long enough for the child to feel understood before being improved. That sounds like this. That really upset you. I can see why that felt awful. You don't have to explain it perfectly. That embarrassed you more than you expected, didn't it? You wanted me to understand before I fixed it. That kind of response does not make children weak. It makes them less alone inside their own experience. And children who feel less alone usually become more reachable, not less. The fifth habit is making the child manage your reaction. This is deeper than most parents realize. A child tells the truth. The room changes. You sigh. You get tense. Your face falls. Your voice sharpens. Dinner gets weird. The ride home goes quiet. Your mood shifts, and the child can feel that their honesty just became something the whole family now has to carry. And children notice that immediately. Especially sensitive children. Especially teenagers. Especially kids who already feel too responsible for other people's emotions. So what do they learn? Not that honesty is always right. They already know that. They learn that honesty creates emotional labor. It creates a heavier atmosphere. It creates more work. It creates fallout. And once a child starts associating truth with managing your disappointment, anxiety, or stress, honesty begins to feel like a burden. That is when many children become selective. They tell you the safe version, the small version, the cleaned up version, the version your nervous system seems able to handle. That is not full trust. That is emotional risk management. And yes, almost every parent does some version of this at times. Because parents are human. Because fear is real. Because love makes people reactive. But the more awareness you bring to your first reaction, the safer truth becomes. The sixth habit is confusing access with connection. A lot of parents know a lot about their child's life, what tests they had, who they sat with, what practice starts at 6, what grade came back, what app they use, what homework is due, what chore is late. That is information. It is not the same as closeness. A child can answer every logistical question and still feel unseen. Because children do not only need to be monitored, they need to feel emotionally known. They want a parent who can notice that the rude answer might be shame, that the silence might be overload, that the messy room might not be laziness, but fatigue, sadness, avoidance, or emotional chaos. That the child saying, "Leave me alone," may not mean, "I don't need you." It may mean, "I need space before I can let you in safely." This is especially important with teens. Teenagers are trying to do two hard things at once: become separate and stay attached. They want more privacy, but they still need guidance. They want independence, but they still need protection. They want you to back off, but they still want to know you are there. So when a parent treats every movement toward privacy as rejection, the teen often feels emotionally chased. And emotional chasing makes honesty harder. Because now the teen is not only managing their own embarrassment, confusion, identity, or peer drama, they are also managing the parent's need for immediate closeness. That is too much. The seventh habit is making every problem feel bigger than it is. A child forgets homework. Now it becomes a speech about responsibility, discipline, habits, and the future. A teen has one bad social moment. Now it becomes a whole conversation about confidence, choices, friendships, respect, and who they are becoming. A child tells a small lie. Now the room fills with trust, disappointment, values, consequences, and a tone so heavy the child starts regretting saying anything. Scale matters. If every small issue creates a big emotional wave, children stop bringing small issues. And then parents meet the problem later, when it is bigger, more defended, and harder to untangle. That is the irony. Parents often intensify small moments because they think seriousness will teach responsibility. But emotional inflation usually teaches hiding. Because the child learns one simple lesson. Small truth, big storm. And if that is the pattern, of course they delay, of course they minimize, of course they say it was nothing. Of course they hope they can fix it quietly before you ever find out. If this is hitting close to home, leave a comment with one real-life example of a moment when your child brought you something small, and only later you realized your reaction probably made it feel much bigger than it needed to be. Just one honest example. Because this happens in far more families than people admit. The 8th habit is protecting the rule while damaging the relationship. Now this part matters, because some parents hear all of this and think, so what? No rules, no standards, no consequences, just endless empathy and emotional processing while the house burns down. No, children need boundaries. They need leadership. They need adults who can say no and mean it. They need structure. They need consequences. They need someone bigger than the moment. But they do not need humiliation. That is the difference. A child can survive a boundary. What damages trust is when the boundary arrives with contempt, sarcasm, mockery, character attacks, or emotional force so strong that the child feels small instead of guided. You can say, that behavior is not okay, without turning the child into the problem. You can say, there will be a consequence, without making love feel unstable. You can say, we need to deal with this, without making the room feel unsafe for truth. That balance is what strong parenting actually is. Not softness without structure. Not structure without humanity. Both. And when children experience both, something powerful happens. They start learning that conflict does not automatically destroy connection. That mistakes do not have to become emotional exile. That being corrected does not mean being crushed. That lesson changes everything. Because once a child believes your presence is strong and safe at the same time, trust has somewhere to grow. Not instantly, not magically, but for real. And this is the part most parents do not see until the distance has already grown. They think the problem is the attitude, the silence, the eye roll, the short answers, the locked door, the defensive tone, the way their child seems present in the house, but emotionally somewhere else. But those are usually not the real problem. They are the surface. The deeper problem is this. The child has started deciding, often unconsciously, that being fully real in front of the parent costs too much. Too much explanation, too much correction, too much tension, too much disappointment, too much emotional weather for one honest moment. And when that happens, something painful begins to grow inside the relationship. The child splits into two versions, the version that functions and the version that feels. The functioning version answers questions, follows routines, says enough, keeps things moving, gets through the day, makes the family look normal from the outside. The feeling version stays hidden. That is where the real confusion goes, the real shame, the real insecurity, the real social fear, the real mistakes, the real sadness, the real anger, the real self-doubt. Parents can feel this split without knowing how to name it. That is why they say things like, I feel like my child is hiding something. I know they're not telling me everything. They talk to me, but they don't really talk to me. I feel like I'm losing them, and I don't even know why. And that feeling is usually accurate. Not because your child stopped needing you, not because your child stopped loving you, but because your child started protecting themselves from what happens in your presence when things get difficult. That sentence is hard to hear, but if you can hear it, really hear it, it changes everything. Because now you stop asking only, how do I get my child to open up? And you start asking something much more important. What has my child learned happens here when the truth is messy? That question reveals the whole emotional climate of the relationship. If the truth becomes pressure, the child hides. If the truth becomes a lecture, the child edits. If the truth becomes your anxiety, the child protects you from it. If the truth becomes shame, the child delays. If the truth becomes a character judgment, the child disappears emotionally in real time. This is why so many children seem fine until suddenly they do not. Because hiding often works for a while. Polished answers work for a while. Selective honesty works for a while. Pretending not to care works for a while. But eventually, what is hidden starts leaking through behavior, through irritability, through withdrawal, through lying, through procrastination, through phone obsession, through emotional numbness, through random explosions over tiny things, through that strange flatness that makes a parent think, I can't reach my child anymore. And here is the mistake many parents make at that exact point. They push harder. More questions, more monitoring, more lectures, more consequences, more urgency, more analysis, more emotional pursuit. But if the child's real issue is not lack of rules, but lack of emotional safety, then increasing pressure will not create honesty. It will create better hiding. That is why some children become very skilled at looking okay. They know how to give the clean version. They know how to say just enough. They know how to sound calm while shutting down inside. They know how to end a conversation before it becomes emotionally expensive. And parents often mistake that for maturity. But a child who knows how to protect themselves from you is not necessarily a mature child. Sometimes that is simply a careful child. A child who has learned the emotional map of the house. A child who knows which truths are safe and which truths bring storms. A child who has figured out that the easiest way to stay connected is to stay partially hidden. That is not what parents want, but it is what many children quietly learn. So what changes it? Not one perfect conversation, not one family meeting, not one dramatic apology in the kitchen while everyone cries and healing music plays in the background. What changes it is pattern. Children trust patterns. They do not trust intentions they cannot feel. If your tone changes, they notice. If your timing changes, they notice. If your face becomes safer, they notice. If your first reaction gets steadier, they notice. If your curiosity becomes less loaded, they notice. If you stop turning every emotional moment into a correction, they notice. And when they notice enough of that, something subtle begins to happen. They test you. Not in the dramatic way people imagine. In small ways. A slightly more honest answer. A slightly less edited confession. A tiny admission. A moment of real emotion. A truth they would have hidden before. And what you do in those moments matters more than most parents realize. Because children are always asking one silent question. What happens to me when I am not easy in front of you? Not when I am polite. Not when I am winning. Not when I am performing. Not when I am calm and agreeable and emotionally convenient. When I am messy. When I am ashamed. When I am scared. When I am confused. when I am wrong, when I am difficult to deal with, what happens to me then? Do I get guided, or do I get handled? Do I get understood, or do I get managed? Do I get corrected with dignity, or do I get made to feel small? That is the question under almost every parent-child conflict, and that is why dignity matters so much. Children can tolerate a lot more correction than adults think. What they struggle with is humiliation, contempt, sarcasm, mockery. The look that says, "Here we go again." The tone that says, "You are exhausting." The reaction that says, "Your mistake is now bigger than you can emotionally carry." Once dignity becomes unstable, honesty drops. Because now the child is not only dealing with consequences, they are trying to protect identity. That is when you start hearing things like, "Whatever, I don't know, it's not a big deal, forget it, leave me alone." And parents often hear disrespect. But many times what they are hearing is self-protection. Protection from shame, protection from exposure, protection from the feeling of becoming too small inside the relationship. And this is where strong parenting gets misunderstood. Strong parenting is not louder parenting. It is not colder parenting. It is not more humiliating parenting. It is not winning every confrontation. Strong parenting is being able to hold the boundary without crushing the person. That is strength. To say, "This behavior is not okay," without sending the message, "You are the problem." To say, "There will be a consequence," without making love feel unstable. To say, "Tell me the truth," and make the room steady enough for truth to survive there. That is real authority. And children trust real authority much more than emotional force. Because emotional force may produce obedience in the moment, but it often destroys access later. Real authority does something different. It keeps the relationship open enough for influence to continue. And influence is what parents actually need. Not total control, not perfect compliance. Influence. The kind of influence that makes your child more likely to come to you sooner next time. The kind of influence that makes honesty feel possible before a small problem becomes a larger one. The kind of influence that survives adolescence, conflict, embarrassment, and mistakes. That kind of influence is built through steadiness. And yes, that sounds simple, but it is not easy. Because parenting does not only awaken love, it awakens memory. Your child's behavior touches your fear. Your fear touches your past. Your past touches your body. And suddenly you are reacting not only to the child in front of you, but to every unresolved alarm inside yourself. That is why a small lie can feel huge, why a rude answer can feel personal, why distance can feel unbearable, why silence can feel like rejection, why one bad grade can feel like catastrophe, why one secret can make a parent feel like everything is slipping away. But if parents do not become aware of that, children end up paying for fears they did not create. That is why self-awareness is one of the deepest forms of love in parenting. To notice, my fear is getting louder than my understanding. I want control more than connection right now. I'm about to make this moment emotionally bigger than it needs to be. I'm reacting to what this means to me, not only to what it means to my child. That pause changes families. Because once a parent can pause, repair becomes possible. And repair is where many relationships either heal or harden. Every parent gets it wrong. Every good parent gets it wrong. You will overreact. You will sound sharper than you meant to. You will ask too many questions. You will push when you should have paused. You will bring your own tension into the room. That is part of being human. The danger is not imperfection. The danger is unrepaired imperfection. When a parent gets it wrong and then defends ego instead of repairing, the child learns something painful. The child learns that truth flows one way, from parent to child, never child to parent. But when a parent comes back and says something honest, the relationship changes. I came in too strong. You were already overwhelmed, and I made it harder. I wanted the truth too fast. I let my fear turn into pressure. We still need to deal with what happened, but I want to do it without making you feel attacked. You didn't deserve that tone. That kind of repair is powerful, not because it erases the issue, not because it cancels the boundary, but because it teaches the child something most people spend adulthood trying to learn. Conflict does not have to destroy connection. Mistakes do not have to become emotional exile. Love does not have to turn dangerous when things get hard. That lesson is life-changing. And if this video has helped you see your child, and maybe even yourself, more clearly, subscribe to the channel and share this with one person who truly cares about family, parenting, and the hidden psychology inside everyday conversations. Not because families need more perfect advice, but because so many good parents are trying to build trust while unknowingly repeating patterns that make trust harder. Because once you understand how this really works, you stop hearing your child the same way. You hear that fine may mean unsafe. You hear that nothing may mean too much. You hear that whatever may mean I'm protecting myself. You hear that sarcasm may be fear wearing armor. You hear that distance may not be rejection at all. It may be the child's attempt to preserve dignity in a moment that already feels too intense. That does not mean children should never be challenged. They should. It does not mean there should be no standards. There should. It does not mean there should be no consequences. There absolutely should. But challenge works best inside connection. Standards work best inside steadiness. Consequences work best when they teach responsibility without humiliating the child who receives them. That is the balance. Not weak parenting, not harsh parenting, steady parenting. The kind where your child feels both things at once. I am safe here, and my parent can still lead me. When children feel only safety with no structure, they feel uncontained. When they feel only structure with no safety, they hide. Trust grows when both are present. And maybe that is the deepest point of all. The goal is not to raise a child who tells you everything. The goal is to become the kind of parent your child does not have to emotionally protect themselves from. Read that again in your own mind. Not a perfect parent. Not an endlessly patient parent. Not a parent who never gets angry, never misreads the moment, never feels fear. A parent whose love does not become too dangerous to be honest around. That changes everything. Because when a child no longer has to choose between honesty and self-protection, something beautiful starts to happen. They come sooner. They hide less. They recover faster after conflict. They bring smaller truths before they become bigger lies. They start learning that being known is survivable. That being corrected does not mean being crushed. That being imperfect does not mean being unwanted. And that may be one of the greatest gifts a parent can ever give. Not perfection, not control, not a flawless family image, but a relationship where truth can still find its way home.